I genuinely believe that there will never be a hero shooter that is as good as Paladins ever again. Because you may have heard that Paladins, the often mislabeled Overwatch clone, which has managed to survive for 9 entire years, is tragically finally on its last legs and will no longer be getting any updates. And being quite a sad little loser who's played a lot of these hero shooters like Team Fortress 2, Overwatch, Marvel Rivals, this is actually a massive shame. Because despite often being disregarded as just an Overwatch clone, Paladins did actually have so many little unique and special features that all added up to make this game an experience you just couldn't have anywhere else. And of these unique features, perhaps the number one reason why I've wasted so much of my life playing this game is because of this one character here called Cassie. And it's not because of her massive gravity-defying boobs that somehow jiggle through her armor, but instead it's because of her movement ability and how this perfectly interplays with the mechanics of Paladins. Because like most hero shooter characters, Cassie has a direct damage attack, an explosive attack, a knockback attack, in addition to this dodge roll movement ability here. But of her abilities, what makes them into something that no game will ever replicate is this card building system that Paladins has here, where you can build an entire deck to sort of buff different parts of the character you play as, and in particular, this card here can completely change the way that Cassie is played. Because this card here makes it so that landing your first shot after dodge rolling reduces its 6-second cooldown by 4 seconds, meaning that in 2 seconds you can use your movement ability again and again and again, so long as you can consistently keep landing that first shot every single time, which basically turns Cassie from a character who should sort of be in the middle back line, behind the tank and defending the healers, into this really aggressive frontline bullying Starscream type character that can get right into the enemy's face, do a bunch of damage, and then just roll away again to survive, just as long as you can keep consistently landing that first shot and therefore consistently keep using your dodge roll. Because then when you add in another card which gives you healing on dodge roll, in addition to these specific items which you can buy in the in-game store, which you can purchase throughout a game to reduce this cooldown down to 0 seconds, you've suddenly got this really high stakes and high skill ceiling character, which makes it so that most of the time, winning the fight is entirely dependent on your own ability to land that first shot. And if you do land it consistently, you are quite literally just going to roll the enemy team. And so depending on something so specific and so difficult to achieve consistently just makes the whole game feel so tense and rewarding, as you are completely dependent on your own skills to do well, rather than it coming down to just typical hero shooter nonsense as to whether you win the fight or not. And what's really cool about this is that the developers were aware of this playstyle and deliberately made it so that one of her talents, which are like these abilities you can pick at the start of each match, actually supports this aggressive playstyle and makes it so that that first shot after dodge rolling does even more damage, which puts even more pressure on that first shot and therefore just makes the whole thing even more rewarding to land. But now, I do want to make it clear that I don't just like this character because she's ridiculously overpowered, as there's actually many characters in Paladins who can be set up in similar ways, or who can just counter this super aggressive type of gameplay with a stun or something, and therefore force you into a more defensive, less aggressive position. But what is nice is when there is that opening to actually go hard and be really aggressive, and you take it, then it's entirely up to your own skills and your own ability to land that first shot as to whether you're successful or not, which, like I keep saying, is just ridiculously rewarding. And so whenever I go across to a similar game to Paladins, there's just no feeling like this, as they're all just a bit more perfectly balanced, to the point where there's much less opportunity to metaphorically and literally just roll through the enemy, because the whole thing is built more around picking certain characters and then picking other characters to counter those characters, rather than the sort of meticulously stacked skills and abilities of Paladins. And so far, the only character I've found who feels even somewhat similar is Wolverine in Marvel Rivals, as he does damage based on the amount of maximum health the enemy has, in addition to getting stronger and stronger as you do more damage, meaning that he's great for attacking tanks and stuff, and similar to Cassie, you as the player get rewarded for getting stuck into the fight, doing as much damage as possible, and then getting out again as quickly as you can. But this was actually something that Cassie could do as well, as one of her other talents modifies her knockback ability so that for 4 seconds after knocking back a target, she also does percentage-based damage based off of the enemy's maximum health, which basically makes makes her into a mini Wolverine tank killer as well, meaning you get all the fun of aggressively dodge rolling as Cassie, along with all of the fun of bullying big targets like Wolverine. Or you can also just use that knockback ability to push people off the map, which is immensely satisfying as well. Because despite often being called an Overwatch clone, this game has so many little features that were absolutely unique. But of all of them, there was one feature that this game had that all of these other hero shooters should absolutely loot from its corpse, and that is this anti-healing feature here, formerly known as cauterize. Because basically the healers in Paladins are ridiculously powerful, to the point where they could basically keep each of their teams alive forever, and therefore make the whole match last as long as a speech about how bad phones are from a boomer. And so to balance this out, every single weapon in Paladins applies this anti-healing effect for a few seconds, therefore massively reducing the healer's output, meaning that not only do healers now have to work around this, and instead of just spamming the healing key waiting for the cooldown to reset, they now have to do things like sync their healing up to the tank's shield and wait for the anti-heal to have worn off before healing again, but also it just really encourages fast-paced and aggressive gameplay, as without constantly making sure that the enemy is constantly taking damage and therefore constantly receiving anti-heal, they'll just never die. So it really is in your best interest to play as aggressively as possible most of the time. And what's really interesting about this is that the percentage of anti-healing actually increases as the match goes on, meaning that the speed and the tempo of the game also increases as time goes on, as it gets easier to both drop the enemy and for the enemy to drop you, until you eventually get to the final battle where everyone's at their weakest, but also everyone's now bought all of their items and is also now used to the strengths and weaknesses of the enemy team, and you just end up with this really tense, fast-paced final battle for that point, which just has so many little extra dynamics that you don't get in games like Marvel Rivals or Overwatch, and which, of course, all goes brilliantly hand in hand with this aggressive, rewarding style of playing Cassie. And so all of this is probably why I've wasted more than 50 days of my life playing this game. And if we take a look at Marvel Rivals, which seems to be the future of hero shooters, it's clear to see that it's taking much more of the Overwatch path. And so sadly, I think there'll just never be a game that has such an interesting mix of little features as Paladins ever again. I mean, maybe there's a chance for Paladins to make a comeback, but either way, I'm just really grateful and really thankful to the developers who worked on this game for so long and made it into something so special.
Today, we introduce an exciting new hero to our lineup. Meet Freya. Freya is a hero with a unique arsenal at her fingertips. Armed with an explosive crossbow and a cape that gives her serious airtime, Freya's kit demands precision and a steady, long-range aim.
Right, so I wanted to end the video there, but it turns out I was wrong about Cassie being left in the dust with Paladins. Because apparently, not only has Overwatch 2 brought in literally the exact same character, you know, minus the massive boobs, which, I mean, come on guys, we used to be a society. But anyway, she's called Freya, and not only does she look exactly the same, and also have largely very similar weapons and abilities, but also Overwatch 2 brought in this update a Paladin style perk system as well. And so presumably this makes everything that I just talked about with Cassie completely irrelevant, and hopefully a similar character can live on throughout this game. But what's interesting is that stuff like this new character and this perk system takes a long time to implement. You don't just make it overnight. But Paladins was only announced as dead like a few weeks ago, and so they must have been working on this stuff for at least a few months already, meaning that regardless of the state of Paladins, they were already doing this. And so Overwatch 2 must just be really out of ideas to be copying the game that allegedly copied them. Because on top of this, I just read on the Overwatch wiki that in Overwatch 2, which I've not played because, you know, I'm not an idiot, they've also stolen Paladin's anti-healing feature as well. And so I suppose this is kind of a good thing, because it looks like Paladins is going to live on through Overwatch 2. They're just going to steal everything. But knowing Overwatch 2, they'll almost certainly just screw it up. So, you know, Paladins is probably still dead anyway. But anyway, now I'm done for real, unless Overwatch announces that they've stolen, you know, Fernando from Paladins. Also, is that Chase from Genlock? Remember Chase? Remember Genlock? It's Ruby! Look, it's Ruby from Ruby!